cricket, Sri Lanka through its cricket. That's what Chinaman, the legend of Pradeep Matthew, Shehan Karunatilaka's debut novel is about. He describes himself as a bass player and an advertising copywriter, but I suspect that after the 2012 Commonwealth Book Prize for Chinaman, he's going to be spending a lot of time doing interviews like this one. So you're doing a lot of interviews like this one? Has it just since the prize or since the book came out, how many have you done?
I've been talking about the book a lot.
You've been talking about
the book's been out. I mean, I finished it 3 years ago, so yeah, it's been a slow burn. But lately, I think with these prizes, suddenly the shelf life of a book increases. So I have been talking a lot about cricket and Sri Lanka and drunks. But no, I had to sit and research it for 3 years. So I might as well talk about it for twice that time. It's fine. Yeah.
It works fine for you. Describe Chinaman to us. I'm going to stick with the short form. I know it's Chinaman, the legend of Pradeep Matthew, but Chinaman.
Yeah.
Is it cricket, Sri Lanka, drunks?
The intention was a detective story, actually. That's the basic, if you look at the bare bones of the structure, that's what it is. It's a detective and his sidekicks seeking a shadowy figure. But I just want to put my spin on that classic structure, and so the detective turns out to be a drunk sports writer, and his sidekick is his statistician who also enjoys a bit of Arrack now and again, and they are chasing this shadowy cricketer, this genius who disappeared, played a few games and disappeared. So I think the cricket is really the texture of the book. The heart of the book is this man's quest. He's at the end of his life and he realizes he hasn't done much apart from drink Arrack and watch cricket. And this is sort of his way of scoring a few sixes off the last over, and this quest is almost a way of him validating his life. So I think that's the soul of the book. But of course, because he's a sports writer and there are a lot of people in Sri Lanka who are obsessed with cricket.
So cricket is the backdrop, the texture, as you said. Arrack, what does it taste like? Because I've read the word Arrack there many times.
So Arrack's our national drink, and I would say it's a cross between perhaps whiskey and rum, maybe more whiskey than rum. It's slightly sweeter than normal Scotch. But yeah, it's drunk widely, and I've encountered a bottle like in Kerala. I think Kerala is quite similar to Sri Lanka, and so I've encountered it there. But I'm surprised there isn't more, because I'm sure Indians would like the taste of it.
I'll hop down. Get a taste of Arrack the next time I'm in Kerala or Sri Lanka for that matter. Yeah. You said you spent 3 years researching the book. Now, what was the research? I mean, was it, you know, about cricket? Because there's a lot of statistics, a lot of games, a lot of players. But then there's also the LTTE warlord, and, you know, there's a lot of other stuff as well. So what was the research for Chinaman?
I had the premise quite early. What if the greatest cricketer of all time was unfortunate enough to play for Sri Lanka in the 1980s. That was the premise, and I thought it was interesting to delve into. But the book only, I think, really took off for me when I got that narrative voice. So I decided to get a drunk to tell the story. That sort of spun it in new directions. But I also realized if I'm writing about cricket obsessives, I would have to become one.
So you weren't naturally one?
Not really, no. I was a cricket fan in that I watched games growing up as in the 80s when Sri Lanka used to get thrashed by everyone, and then when we won the '96 World Cup fairy tale style, I was there then, and every Sri Lankan around the world got swept up in that. But yeah, I stopped watching after that, so I'm not someone who follows every test series, and if there's something of interest, I might look at it. But I know there are people, a lot of Sri Lankans, and not just old men, there are now these young guys on blog sites who sit there, and even Sri Lanka playing India, which happens every single week, and we're all sick to death of seeing that. But I mean, I'm sure they'll play, Sri Lanka just got thrashed, but I'm sure they'll play each other next week, and there'll be a different result. But there are people who sit and watch those meaningless matches and sit and analyze stats. And so therefore, I knew that was my readership, and I had to get that right. So for those, I mean, I would say a year of research, but the research never stops. Even while you're writing, while you're revising, you're still kind of looking at what other facts you can bring there. So yeah, I did watch a lot of cricket, download a lot of stats, and then in the afternoons, I would interview some of these characters. I'd go to these seedy bars and talk to the uncles sitting there about cricket, about Sri Lanka, just about their opinions. And you find a lot of drunk uncles are very willing to talk and quite articulate if you get them before the 3-hour mark when the Arrack bottle is finished, and then all bets are off.
Did you hang out with a lot of the cricket sports journalists?
I spoke to a lot of sports writers, and I think anyone, you don't have to be a professional sports writer, anyone is willing to talk about cricket in Sri Lanka. So getting them to sort of give me anecdotes and talk about their opinions and theories, that wasn't difficult.
You know, so that's the part that's slightly tough to understand. How much of this is real? How much of this is fiction? How much of this is your imagination? Is there anything which is purely your imagination?
If I look at the stories, even the most far-fetched ones, so...
Which is the most far-fetched one?
Well, I think the one that I didn't even think was... I had second thoughts about putting in the book was the idea that there is a cricket ground in Sri Lanka under which there is a bunker with recording equipment, and there's a midget in the bunker who sits there, has been recording cricket matches since 1948 onwards. And but again, it's based in fact...
Don't tell me that's true.
Well, okay. The cricket grounds were turned into aircraft hangars during the Second World War, and once when the Japanese bombed Colombo, the SSC was used as a launching pad for these aircraft. So that was true, and it did occur to me that this recording equipment would have all been in bunkers under the ground. And there is a midget who hangs around a certain cricket ground, so it just seemed, and who has been there since the 50s and can remember every cricket match. And I talked to these groundsmen around the country as well, and because they've been observing, and they would give me so much gossip. And they bring a different
perspective and gossip, like, you know.
I was looking for gossip. The facts I can get from the internet and I can get in books, but I was looking for the dirt and the gossip, so I would interview people on the fringes rather than people in the establishment. So ex-players who had a bit of an axe to grind, sports writers who felt they were unappreciated, people who were ousted who were in sort of corridors of power, and yeah, the grounds people. So so the midget in the bunker, that's pretty fantastical. The other one which I thought was fantastical, which may not be, is the idea of this LTT fixer, this match fixer character, who also happens to fix assassinations, elections, and who knows what else. I mean, that was a bit of a James Bond villain for me, and I had fun writing it. But then subsequently, since the books come out, we've had a few betting scandals, and it seems eerily close to what was described there. So I don't know how far-fetched that was, but everything in the book, down to every single match, is based on something that happened. So every episode that I relate about, say, detailing a cricket score, that corresponds to something in reality. I would base it on a real match, but I might just tweak it a bit to add Pradeep Matthew in there. So a lot more than you expect is true. But that was also part of the fun of it, mixing up what is true and what is not.
So I don't watch any cricket. I'm the opposite of whatever, you know, a cricket fan. I just cannot bear to watch cricket. So it was a bit intimidating to pick up the book, because I thought, oh my God, this is about cricket, and cricket is something I have no interest in. And you've put in all the, you've put in quite a few diagrams and quite a few explanations. So a layperson like me who has no interest in the game understands some of the basics thanks to you. But, did you have to try very hard to include readers like me to make sure that this was a book that didn't put us off because it was about cricket? I'm putting myself in this, spotlight there, but...
Once I drafted it a few times, like I said, I started off writing a drunk detective story which had overtones of cricket, but once I done the research and put in all the cricket bits for the fans, I realized that the book was about a lot more, and this came like in the third, fourth draft, that it was actually about this old man's struggle, and I was aware that cricket is a stumbling block for a lot of readers. Yeah. So my intention then after a few drafts was, if you know nothing about Sri Lanka, and if you don't understand the game or don't even care to understand the game, you should still be able to get into the story. So that's why I then inserted these cheat notes, these little paragraphs and diagrams, so by the 100th page, even the most uninitiated reader would be able to follow the story.
I didn't get at least 5 to 10% of the book. I mean, in terms of the cricket, I didn't get it, even with all the cheat notes. But you've been to America, and if you can crack, the American reader with a book about cricket in Sri Lanka, that's really saying something. So what was the response there like?
Yeah, so that was a real challenge. It took me by surprise as well. For me, getting into England and India seemed like the extent of the book. But when I went there, also it was being marketed differently. So the name word Chinaman, which is a bit of a cricketing term, was taken out. So it was called The Legend of Pradeep Matthew. But it was marketed as a novel about South Asian experience. And I had to go to a lot of bookstores and sort of deliver monologues about it. And so I started off explaining the similarities between baseball and cricket to kind of get them on the... Well, they both use a piece of wood and you throw a ball and you're supposed to hit the ball with it. And
but that's about it, right?
Yeah, they're both, I mean, equally as tedious and can be as boring, but can also be as magical as each other. There are a lot of subtle differences and not very subtle differences. And baseball, like, I think the similarity is the fans, because I was there during the NBA finals and listened in a taxi for like 4 hours, these people analyzing LeBron James and how he was approaching the basket. And that's one point that they were going around for. And I thought, okay, this is not just a cricket thing that happens in Sri Lanka.
So fans are the same around the world.
There is this kind of fetishization of stats to win arguments and how they sit there and analyzing what would to the rest of us, and especially someone like you, if you'd watch it where nothing happens, a meaningless game, but how you can sit around talking about it. So I think that was something in common. But yeah, a lot of readers, I mean, I was talking to readers in Brooklyn and Seattle who had read the book, and for them it was a bit of an exotic exercise. So I don't know if they could find Sri Lanka on the map, but it was like interesting to them to see this subculture and see this game which seems completely pointless. So I think they were approaching it from that point of view. But like I say, it is a human story at the heart of it, and hopefully that's what readers are responding to.
That it sure is. Shehan, how does an advertising copywriter get into writing? Okay, so there's writing involved in both ends. But you know, you're also, what, a bass player? So did you try making a career out of music? And you know, how did it all work? How did Shehan's life pan out? You went and studied business in New Zealand, so it's an interesting.
Well, I studied English. My dad wanted me to do MBA, and I kind of secretly enrolled in English and arts class. I didn't tell him till the 3rd year. He didn't find out till then, and then I did a diploma in business. But yeah, copywriting I drifted into. It was either journalism or writing ads, and writing ads seemed easier. And I was playing bass in bands, but you know, I was nothing more than amateur. We used to just go and play in rock bands and make a bit of noise. And still, I mean, I love playing, but yeah, I don't think that was ever a career option, sadly.
It was never a career option?
Not really. I mean, okay. If I had talent, if I could sing and do stuff, maybe. But yeah, no, we were just
So advertising is still a part of your life? You're still
yes.
writing copy?
So I think in advertising, one thing, in a creative department, every copywriter there will tell you about the screenplay he's writing or the book that she's thinking of doing, and so everyone's secretly writing, and every art director is a filmmaker or photographer or an artist, and so that cliche was true for me as well. I thought, okay, once you're writing copy for Milk Powder, you're thinking about this great screenplay you're going to write. And I did do a few projects in my spare time, but this one I was just very interested in the idea, and I thought I'll take 3 months off and try and research it. I thought I'd make like a short story or novella. Once I started getting into the research, there was such an abundance of stories that, yeah, I ended up writing 600 pages and taking 2.5 years to do it. So I don't think it's unusual that an ad guy aspires to write longer stuff. But okay. The fact is, I think I was fortunate enough to be able to make a living from freelance, to do it for like 2.5 years, because a lot of people try and write novels in a month, say I'm going to take a month off, sit on the beach and write a novel. I don't know how that is possible. For me, I'm quite slow, so I needed that extended time. So
Chinaman is not actually the first piece of work that you've written. It's the first piece of work that's got published.
Yes, yes.
And so what about the previous attempts?
Too
early, too young, too...
A lot of what you mentioned, but main thing was keeping my own attention, because writing, it's quite a tedious process. I mean, you're sitting there for hours, and one day you might get a couple of paragraphs which you're not going to use. The next day you might delete, and so it's quite a slow process, and I wasn't able to keep my interest in the work I was doing. So I'd start an idea for a novel, and after about 20-30 pages you'd get bored of it, or you'd have to research it.
I'm curious, what other ideas did you explore?
I was like writing a lot of genre stuff. So my first one that I finished was like a kind of a noir thriller set in Colombo at the turn of the century. And yeah, it got a bit weird. I think aliens made an appearance, and it just went out of control. I was just kind of, whenever I felt like, just sit there and write, and I put basically all the B-movie cliches into it, and yeah, it was a mess. I mean, after 1.5 years, at least I was wise enough to know that it was a mess, and I read it and I thought, this is beyond repair. So I made a promise to myself that, okay, one, you need to read a lot more and maybe travel a bit more, live a bit more before you sit down to write something. Because at 23, I know there have been prodigies who've written novels at that age, but for me, yeah, I just didn't have anything to say, or yeah.
You're working on something new, and it's set in Sri Lanka, and are you willing to give us any clues about what it's about? Or tell us what it's not about.
Well, one of the lessons I learned from the first book was talking about the book. Because in the first book, all I did was talk about it. And I didn't write about it. So I'd go and have a drink with someone and tell them about my great idea. And I feel it's a silly thing because either they praise you and your head swells and you don't write, or they criticize it and you get discouraged. So with Chinaman, when I learned from those lessons of these aborted novels, and with Chinaman, one thing is that I didn't talk about it, and I wrote every day, and I researched, and I kind of disciplined myself to do it properly.
So you're trying to tell me you're not going to talk about your work in progress?
No.
You're not going to tell me anything about your work in progress?
I'll tell you this, why. It's set in Sri Lanka, and I think probably most things I write will be set in Sri Lanka because there is an abundance of stories.
So there's no cricket, no drunks?
There's no cricket, no drunks.
So is it...
No sports, no old men.
Is it more political?
I don't think it's more political, but it may end up being that way. But it is set in Sri Lanka's past. But I've avoided, I think tonally it'll be very different to what Chinaman was.
Is that deliberate to not be very political in your writing?
Yes.
Why?
One reason there are a lot of political commentators and there's a lot of pontificating on talk shows and in newspaper columns. And I don't know if I am as well informed or articulated on those subjects to write something. I would rather
write... So you
write...
stick to what you know?
Yeah, I'd rather now with China, I'd rather write, a detective story or a sci-fi story and let those elements invade the narrative on the fringes.
Is there anything of you in any of the characters in Chinaman?
I have been accused now of the son of WG who makes an appearance and then sort of takes on...
I thought so. I thought maybe there's a bit of you in that.
Yeah, I have been accused of making this fantasy version of myself. So you got this bass player who has one hit and lives off that. That's the fantasy if you're not a very talented musician. You just want to have one hit and you live off the royalties for the rest of your life. But I think that's a myth now with downloads. I don't think now that structure works. I can see the obvious similarities there, and I sort of play with them a bit towards the end. But I think what was good about WG is, and I think that was another flaw of my early attempts, is that the narrator always ends up sounding like you. And then you don't know how to separate yourself from what you're writing. But when I had WG as my narrator, here I'm writing about a guy who's at least twice my age and of a different generation and different attitude. So that was quite an exhilarating challenge to get yourself in the head of someone very different to you. So with most characters, that was my approach. But yeah, I think with Garfield, I'm probably guilty of putting a bit too much of myself in there. Yeah.
Well, Shehan, all the best with your next book and much more writing. Great to have you on the News Laundry.
Thank you very much. It's been great.